Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new season of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. I am your host, Jordan Ramirez. Our guest today is podcaster and author Ricky Derisz. Is it pronounced Derisz or Derez?
Derisz. You were close, almost,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Ricky Derisz, and he is the host of his podcast series, Mind That Ego. The film that he has chosen for today's episode is Arrival from 2016, directed by Denis Villeneuve, starring Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, and Forest Whitaker, based on the short story The Story of My Life by Ted Chiang, and written for the screen by, I might get this, Herzberg or something like that. So with that aside, I'm going to ask you a few questions right now. Okay. So, when was it that you first saw this film, and why did you pick this movie?
So I remember, and thanks for inviting me on the show, by the way, just to kick us off
Oh yeah, no
with
problem.
that.
Thanks. Yes,
Pleasure to
thank
be
you.
here. Um, so before I went into the kind of realm of mental health, spirituality, and what I do now, I was very much involved in film, and I was working at the time for a website called Movie Pilot. So it's very much on top of movies and particularly sci-fi. I've always loved sci-fi. And I went to watch Arrival in the cinema. So when it came out in 2016. And it's one of the few films that I've seen that I've left and I've felt changed by the movie. Like I could feel something contained in that movie, in that storyline, resonated deeply with me. And
Mm,
I remember just walking out and I was blown away by it.
mm,
Um, and it had a profound impact. And I knew I watched something epic.
mm.
And I watched it last night to reconnect to it, and it's almost like the most I've enjoyed it.
Yes.
um, but yeah, I'd say I've seen it 4 or 5 times and just really connected to the narrative and the complexity and what it brings to life as well.
Mhm. Okay, so was there anything that you took away from this film other than what you just mentioned earlier? Like from a different perspective, whether it was there something like something spiritually or psychologically or scientifically that you connected with this film that maybe someone who has not seen this film could pay attention to when they watch it for the first time?
That's a great question. Yeah. So for me, I believe this to be a masterpiece. I mean, Denis Villeneuve is one of my favorite directors. I feel that he's a master at bringing together, high-end concepts and stringing them together in a story. What I love about this film is it combines a lot of complex topics. So at the base level, the exploration of language and linguistics and the Sapir-Whorf complex. So you take this idea and credit to Ted Chiang as well for the original story and the
Yes.
original
Yeah.
concept.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is that I believe this was made for a visual medium.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that, okay, you've got the idea of language in the Sapir-Whorf complex, changing the way the mind operates through learning a new language. Something which in itself is intriguing, something we can relate to, the idea of expanding one's mind. So you take that concept, you explore that in the realm of an alien encounter movie,
Mm-hmm.
where,
Yeah.
where you then bring in like the quantum non-linear time element
Mm-hmm.
presented through an entire, and I know, sci-fi, there are movies and literature that create language for the purpose of the story, but the visual design and the explanation and the impact of the language. I actually have a tattoo with don't know if you can see it,
Oh yeah,
with
I see.
with the logo for time with like an Escher
Oh
never-ending shape, right?
yeah.
So to take this alien encounter movie, to take the idea that these aliens exist outside of time, that they can see time as non-linear, and then to through the story apply the Sapir-Whorf complex to Amy Adams, Louise, the lead character, to
Mm-hmm.
apply that to her life, and then to just take the balance I find of like the technical deconstruction of trying to communicate with this alien species whilst they're trying to pass on this new language, and how that language adapts,
Mm.
um, along with the very, the emotional resonance with how it affects her life personally, and how learning that language transforms her relationship to time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think is genius. I think taking these high-end concepts, stringing it together, and then creating it in such an impactful way, combined with such a powerful soundtrack by is it Johannesson?
Yeah, I
I
think
think
it
his
is.
name.
Yeah, I have it in this. I have it in this little book, and you
Hmm.
did mention the theme of communication. I did pick up on this as well, throughout the film and the narrative structure. And you did mention it's a nonlinear narrative. Like when I was watching it from the beginning, I originally thought these were flashbacks, but then as the story progresses, I realize it's not flashbacks. It's more like flash forwards is how I would see it.
Yeah, yeah.
That was something that I thought it tricked me at first because I thought what I was watching was like, is she connecting from the past? And I'm thinking, no, she's connecting to the future. That was something that
Hmm.
I did not expect it, but it's a very smart it's a very smart thing that I noticed as I watched this film.
Yeah, I felt the same. Like the first time I watched it, I didn't make that link. So when there was that gradual reveal, and what I really like about this, the way that the revelation slowly occurs, is the use of, we could use the term synchronicity, but
Hmm.
the way that these memories of the future connect to what we see as the present, and how you can see this entanglement of past, present, and future through the flash forwards, and then
Yeah.
also the conversation with the Chinese prime minister, like how that conversation goes on and essentially alters the course of history.
Hmm.
But I also agree. I didn't connect the dots initially
No.
until like that kind of moment where you're like, oh my God, this is preemptive for what she's about to enter into.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
that was something that I didn't notice. But I also liked the relationship. Originally, when I saw the film, I originally thought that it was going to be like a film of violent force because you have the military, who was involved with Forest Whitaker's character as Colonel Weber, and you
Hmm.
have the head of this, and you have the guy who works for the CIA. That was my initial thought when I saw it, but it was more of a psychological drama that felt more, it was more about the dialogue and the body language than it was with the force and with using violence as a means of how you can force they called them the heptapods in the film to
Yeah.
communicate.
Yeah.
um
There's, sorry, go on.
no, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's the quote, I'll paraphrase it, but the quote that Ian, so Jeremy Renner's character, reads from Louise's book, just as they're in the plane initially traveling to the site. Um, and it's along the lines of like the first act of war is always language. And he says, no, it's, oh no, sorry, culture is based upon language. Like the first act of war is language, the first act of peace is language, something along those lines.
Hmm.
And he says, no, it's science. And you kind of see from that preemptively that it is that balance and that between science and language. And then you also have, like you say, the military threat
Hmm.
playing on that expectation, really, of, well, there are aliens that have landed. We've seen so many movies where that is like an existential threat rather than them actually offering to help humanity. So it
Hmm.
does play on that,
It
that kind
does.
of, yeah, reverses that really well.
It does. And that's what I thought was so interesting because, as you mentioned in other science fiction films with alien invasion pictures, there I always thought there was two concepts. There were the ones that use force, and then there were
Mm,
the ones that were more communicative, as in this picture. But this one I thought was more of a film that, as you mentioned, it felt more high concept. It didn't feel like when I watched it, it didn't feel like a typical big budget Hollywood blockbuster. It felt more like an independent picture when I first saw this film.
yeah, that's true.
So yeah. So Do you have a favorite sequence or something that stood out to you as you watched this picture from beginning to end?
Oh, that's a good question. That is a good question. I think the in terms of the visuals, like the
Mhm.
cinematography, there are a few scenes initially when they first enter the spaceship, however whatever you want to call it.
Then they called it the shell in the picture.
The shell, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, they called it the shell.
When they're in the shell and the like center of gravity changes, so they jump off
Yes.
and then they land like on the side and they're looking down at the floor.
Yes.
And this the because you like you say it could be an independent film.
Mm-hmm.
The minimal use of visual design and like the window that we have to these aliens, and I just find that so simple and at the same time so powerful, that contradiction, as well as the use of like the ink or whatever that substance is that they use the language with, and um yeah, that introduction is really powerful. And I think the that scene aligns also with the flash forward with
Mm-hmm.
Louise's, like when she's in the apartment initially, and that kind
Yes.
of crossover in time. So I really like the visuals there, um, as well as just the way that it's depicted how she starts to have this impact, how her reality changes and the memories that she has. I think that's done really well because there's always a risk that that could be a little bit too obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I felt that that was cool, like the subtle, basically the way that those memories are intertwined. So I was moved the most emotionally, but from some of those, the interactions with like a child, and when you start to realize that the personal sacrifice that she's made,
Mm-hmm.
like she saved humanity. And that's I know there was, I don't remember where I read it, but some people criticize the kind of love story element to it.
Oh.
I personally love it. Like
Yeah.
the reason being like just the it shows the collective, like for humanity, she's done something really well, but she's also made this personal sacrifice. So I think the realization that she enters that relationship, she has a child, knowing it's going to lead to great pain,
Mm-hmm.
but it will save humanity. That's the human aspect to it that really hit home for me.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite scenes was, as you mentioned, the introduction of the heptapods, but I also liked the switch of the narration. It started with Amy Adams's character, Louise Banks. She narrated, and I think I have a quote from it's a little quote. She says, "Memory is a strange thing." This is in the beginning of the film, and I started to make a connection with excuse me, the connection between the birth of her child and the death of her child, uh, the relationship going from a loving relationship to a hateful relationship. And then when I started to watch that, I was like, why is her daughter Hannah in the film? Why does she resent her? Why does the relationship between the mother and the daughter start to falter from when she was younger until she becomes
Mm,
like an adolescent? So that was the one thing I started to think to myself, what is going on? What is happening? But yeah, that was something that I thought was pretty interesting. And then as the story progresses, it does start to reveal what is the core aspect of to as to why these two did not get along with each other so well.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I enjoyed that as well. And it also comes to mind now, like just the way that the actual technical aspect to the communication to the language is displayed as well. Like, and it's not one scene in particular, but how you see her making all these notes on the intricate parts of this alien language and like piecing it together, and she's explaining why you can't just ask the question, "What is your purpose?" just like that, and
Yeah.
the background to why you have to build up to that question, and um, even like then the subtle things around why
Hmm.
she calls her daughter Hannah because
Yeah.
it's a palindrome and it works, operates in both directions like time. So there are
Hmm.
these little nuggets of really beautiful, creative moments that all point to that kind of wider tapestry of the story that I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, that I enjoyed that too. I didn't, yeah, as you said, I I didn't start to make the connection, like the game Connect the Dots, as you mentioned, where you have to piece together each sequence that almost mirrors the later sequence in the story. That was what I was trying to do, as the story was nearing the end. Like I had to piece it together,
Mm,
sort of little small revelations. I think one of my favorites was, as you mentioned, she's explaining to Colonel Weber on the marker board, what is your purpose? And then she tries to structure it very well. And then there was another example where she gave out. There's a later sequence where she explains to him the story about Captain Cook and the Aborigines
yeah, that's great.
in the late 18th century, and how they had to communicate. And one of the Aborigines said kangaroo, which meant I do not understand.
Yeah.
And I thought it was pretty interesting that this was the only way to say, to give an example from history as a way to relate to the situation of how to communicate with the heptapods, which I thought was a pretty simple analogy that I thought was really cool.
Yeah, that also links to what you mentioned with this balancing act as well of like the military power
Mm-hmm.
and the approach that Louise and that team are taking. And she has to really like that's a great example of how she has to get them on side because they aren't thinking in the same way that she is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like she has to use powerful analogies. She has to describe language in the way that she sees it in order to avoid just that military force being used, which is really yeah, cool aspect to it as well.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a pretty interesting way, and I loved that she said the only way to get them to communicate is to use a visual aid.
Mm,
So she would use like marker boards, for example, to get them to understand the words, and then they would have to repeat the same words, but in their own sort of coded symbols. And the way that the heptapods communicate, because they don't have any orifices, they have no mouths to communicate. So instead, I always thought, looking at that sequence, it was like looking at an aquarium, in my opinion, because it did remind me of the way that you look at animals in an aquarium. How do you communicate if it has no mouth or if it has no way of understanding? So they had to use something as a way to communicate, which I thought was sort of a connection I made in my head. Um,
yeah.
and also, the one thing I may not understand when I first saw it was the use of, I remembered it was Ian. He brought a little bird in a cage. And that one, I was not sure why he did that. And then later in the story, as she was having a flash forward, I was like, okay, there may be some connection to it, but I do you think you would know what that purpose was of him bringing an animal in a cage to their communication with the heptapods?
No, I thought that last night actually. It seems, and I might be mistaken, but it seems just like a cinematic device. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like the canary down the coal mine metaphor, but with the science, with the technology they have, I'm sure they would have like devices that would be more effective. But
Yeah.
what it does do is the contrast of hearing the bird respond.
Mm-hmm.
I also did actually think as well, like in terms of the setup, none of them are wearing any like climbing apparatus, and
No.
they're just walking on this wall. So they have trust and faith that they're going to
Mm-hmm.
be held by this device. I was
Yeah.
surprised that they didn't.
Yeah.
I was being really picky about it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think unless I'm missing something, like it felt metaphorical to kind of demonstrate that. But that was also something where I had a bit of a question mark around it.
Yeah. So I thought at first it was like when Hannah explains, and this I thought was somewhat of a revelation when she said, in the flash forward, this is called Mommy and Daddy Talk to the Animals, where she had these little clay
Mm,
figures, and then she made a little drawing. And then I thought, was the bird in the cage meant to connect to the scene where Ian brought this actual bird in the cage, like that sort of connection? I thought maybe it could be that, or maybe it was something else. I don't know. So,
mm,
but that was something that I thought maybe that's a connection.
yeah.
But yeah, but that was something I liked about it. And I also liked, as you mentioned, the visuals, the cinematography I thought was also great in the film. And I also thought the set design of when they first meet the heptapods, I didn't make the connection, but I sort of thought of it near the end of the film, that the window and the placement of where they were standing at to meet the heptapods, it almost mirrored Louise Banks's apartment because
Yeah.
she had that same structure. And I thought, does the lamp that's right in front of the window, does it almost mirror the shell spacecraft that they were landing, or maybe that was just a
Yeah.
coincidence?
Yeah. Do you know what? You say that. Something that comes to mind, there's the scene between Ian and Louise
Mm-hmm.
where he says something along the lines of "No wonder I'm single," or like something about communication, and she basically says you can be really good at communication and still single. And that window with the heptapods is a representation of an attempt to communicate an alien language. And I wonder if the symbol of that with Louise's apartment, because later on it nudges forward and Ian's outside, like to
Mm-hmm.
come inside. And I wonder if that represents how she could communicate with the heptapods, but the communication broke down in her most intimate relationship when she tells Ian, like as we see in one of the flash forwards, she tells Ian about the imminent death of their child,
Mm-hmm.
and he says that was a mistake. You shouldn't have done it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like she's arguably the most skilled linguistic genius on the planet, and at the same time, she didn't communicate effectively with her husband. So I wonder if there's like a parallel with that as well.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking too as I watched it going forward.
Mm.
So so do you have any anecdotes or memorabilia you like to share besides the tattoo? Maybe like did you meet somebody who worked on the film, or maybe somebody who saw the film, but maybe they shared something that you would like to share?
No, I kind of had an early spoiler with the tattoo, didn't I?
Oh yeah, you did.
Kind of gave it away.
Um,
No, I don't think there's anything else.
oh.
I know that a lot of I say a lot of I've got a few friends that would really feel that this film does depict a deeper truth to the nature of reality
Mm-hmm.
in a way that is so paradigm shifting
Mm,
that I think the consensus reality hasn't yet caught up with. But in terms of the quantum realm and like time being non-linear, I know that it is something that is really impactful in that sense.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, other than the tattoo, I mean that was I think it was just being so inspired. It was the first tattoo that I had.
Oh wow,
Yeah, and
that's awesome.
yeah, I really went for it. Loved the just the design, just the aesthetic of these logos. Loved the idea of an impossible shape, and it just felt, yeah, it just felt like the right thing to do because it is, the idea of time being past, present, and future and interacting, in this kind of never-ending loop, informative spiral kind of motion, just felt a little bit fancy to get inked on my body for life.
Yeah. So yeah, but I also thought besides the ones that I mentioned throughout the film, I don't oh wait, I do remember there was another sequence, or maybe not. Did you notice in the film that as she was getting these sort of booster shots, Louise's character starts to shake a little bit. She starts to sort of have these. I thought she was having some sort of insomniac type sleeps where she keeps seeing. There's one sequence where after she has a flash forward, she imagines there is a heptapod right inside her tent, and I thought maybe it might be the effect of these booster shots that they were told because they didn't want to be contaminated.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was something that I noticed. And I also liked that when they were trying to figure out what each symbol meant, each symbol that was given, it could be like a structured sentence, or it could be like another way to say a word. But yeah, that was something that I also enjoyed as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
so sorry, do you want to carry on or
no, no, you go ahead first.
yeah, I'll just riff off what you said because something I like as well, and this is just coming to me now. It wasn't previous when I watched it, but with the dreams, that people say if you're learning a new language, if you dream in that language, that's when you know that you're reaching a point of fluency, or that it's deep enough in your subconscious, your unconscious mind, and your memory that it's appearing in your dreams.
Mm-hmm.
That may be deliberate or not. I'm not sure, but I wonder if there is that nod to when she starts dreaming of the heptapods is showing that she's becoming fluent in their language, and that's why it's starting to have an impact. And also, like you mentioned, is really important because they almost, because the stakes are so high, and when it comes down to the way they're interpreting, the way the heptapods might interpret the word weapon,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like it's a life lesson in
Yeah.
communication, because they're basically saying we could respond if we assume they mean weapon as we know it, and they're going to try and attack us, and that could be the obliteration of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Or we could pause and say, what if they mean that's a tool and not a weapon? Because we
Mm-hmm.
know culturally that there's a difference. They might not.
Mm-hmm.
And that nuanced balancing act of interpretation, and kind of almost like a game of poker, they've got to think what they might be thinking about what they're thinking,
Yeah.
while the stakes are like humanity's futures at stake. So that is also a really beautiful aspect to the process of them learning to communicate.
Yeah. It reminded me of a scene in the film when Louise was trying to translate from Mandarin because the Chinese translator was also trying to use mahjong tiles as a way to say, oh, this could be something,
Yeah, yeah.
which I thought was pretty interesting. So that I thought was interesting, and it also was a way to say, I don't know what they're saying, and Louise had to translate something like flower or something like peace or something like that. I might not remember too much of that sequence, but I thought it was an interesting sequence that in other cultures, uh not like the United States where we often have to use words in the English
Mm,
language. In other cultures, they would have to use like symbols, or maybe they would have to use other ways to communicate through like literary structures that, as I said, in the United States, we don't have that same structure that other
hmm
countries and other cultures might have. So I thought that was a pretty interesting device. And I also thought that in the film that being that it was China and then later Russia had, I also thought that the Russians, because they also mistook what they were saying, that they, I don't know if this was just on the filmmaker's part or I don't know, whatever, that they had to off their translator because they were unable to communicate well with the heptapod. So that I thought was pretty interesting to me. Like each nation has like their own interpreters and different ways of translating. But they also have like their own ways of saying what this really means, as you mentioned, the weapon as is it like a physical weapon or is it a tool that could help advance humanity?
Yeah,
That I thought was pretty interesting.
yeah. And
Um,
also the way that Ian, towards the end when those two like rogue shoulders
yeah,
soldiers put the bomb
yeah.
in there, and then the heptapods kind of in one go place out that display of a huge network of images and symbols, and it's Ian that works out. I can't remember exactly how he does it, but he works out like the fraction or the decimal point of what this adds up to, and then it
Uh,
works out as 1/12th.
Yeah, it was a point oh, it was 0.83, I think it was.
But very well remembered. Yeah. And
Yes.
then as the fraction of 1/12th, they realize we've got a piece of the jigsaw, but we have to
Mhm.
work together. And
Yeah.
that was really cool how the kind of theoretical mathematics side started to inform as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I like that.
I did too. And I also thought that the film was trying to say that even though the countries have differences in cultures, that I thought the message of the film was we have to work together no matter what barriers we have. We have to work together in order to make sure that something doesn't go wrong. That I thought was was something that I took away from it. So we're
Hmm.
running a little short on time at about 8 minutes right now. So do you have any last statements or recommendations similar to this film that maybe my audience could see or watch?
Yeah, I do. Probably not a surprise, like Interstellar being
Hmm.
a very good compliment. I imagine that most people have seen it by now,
Yes.
but it works well with this film.
Mm,
And I think the nature of time and playing with like the fourth dimension, the thread that's similar but slightly different is almost that play of what would it be like if the future is influencing the past, and like how the films display that. I think when you compare it, it adds depth to both films independently.
mhm,
Um, in terms of the nature of time, I think Dark, the Netflix series, the German series,
mhm,
is TV, not film, but that's also a fantastic and really well executed
mhm,
depiction of like the nature of time and time travel, um, and the repercussions around that.
mhm.
Um, what else? I'm trying to think of others
Oh,
that maybe the network of movies. I know it's quite it's distinct, but I just think of Moon
oh,
and the
I
Sam
think
Rockwell.
that's Universal. I think
Ah,
that
okay.
yeah, I think that is
Yeah,
Universal.
yeah,
So Moon, Dark, and Interstellar are your
yeah,
recommendations.
yeah.
Before we end the show, so where would my audience find you, just to plug yourself or your show so that maybe they could reach out to you or maybe listen to your podcast or your channel?
Yeah, of course. So you can check out mindthatego.com. That's my website.
Okay.
Um, Mind That Ego also on YouTube. It is the home there. And the Mind That Ego podcast is available on YouTube, on Spotify, or all podcast platforms. And it is, I guess it's adjacent to the what we've discussed because
Yeah.
I have a strong interest in those topics.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see cinema and film and storytelling and tap into those topics, that's like the ideal Venn diagram for me. So if you're interested in consciousness, spirituality, mental health, it's quite an expansive approach to that kind of thing. But maybe there'll be some people that are tuning in and intrigued.
Okay, thank you so much. So this has been Jordan Ramirez, the host of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, along with my guest, Ricky Derisz. And thank you so much for being on today's podcast.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And I hope to see you in the future soon. Okay.
You too.
Okay.
Great to see
Bye.
you.
Great to see
Bye.
you. Bye.